Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that will work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable coaching to learn more.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. My name is Collin Stewart. Today I am solo, and I'm coming to you with some of my favorite things for 2023. I thought we'd do something a little bit different today. I'm trying a different setup. I'm trying a different style. And so here's to experimenting in 2024. So before I get into it, we got 4 things that I'm going to cover today. If none of them are interesting, then feel free to bail out. This is going to be a bit shorter than our typical podcast interviews because, as you'll notice it's just me, and I've got another camera here. If you're listening to the audio, you can't see me looking around, but I'm trying a different thing. All right, so spoiler alert, my 4 favorite things for 2023 were Apollo, Clay, ChatGPT, and Orum. Let's talk about them. I want to start with Apollo because I think Apollo is probably the biggest risk we took this in 2023. And technically, it started in 2022, back in December, and we rolled it out in 2023. If you don't know what Apollo is, it's a sequencer and a data source all kind of pulled together. Now, when I say it was the biggest risk we took, we moved from Zoom Info and Outreach on top of Salesforce. And so every SDR that we were placing for a client had to have a license for Salesforce, and we had this crazy complicated Salesforce setup. Nothing against Salesforce, it's just the way we had set it up to get the data that we wanted wasn't amazing. So we had Salesforce, then we had then we had Outreach, and then we had Zoom Info. It was complicated. It was a good system. Outreach is pretty incredible. Zoom Info has good data. I have some comments on Zoom Info I'll save for later. But overall, it was a pretty good system. And so you might be wondering, why move away from a good system if moving away is such a risk? And the answer was 50% discount. And it wasn't just a discount. It's not like Apollo came and said, hey, we want to have you. You guys are so big, blah, 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 blah. It was none of that. It was, they came to us with a good price that was pretty similar to what you'll see on their website. And what they offer is probably 80% as good as both tools, but half the cost of one tool. And so it was enough of I think it was enough of a incentive to try and make a change. The change wasn't as smooth as I had hoped, but I mean, I don't think that has anything to do with Apollo. I think it has everything to do with just changing your sequencer and your data tool it's going to be a big change, especially when everything is fully integrated into your Salesforce. So what I love about Apollo is the pricing. It can be confusing sometimes, and sometimes the tiers and the, what you get and this and that's a little bit more complicated. But at the end of the day, you're getting 2 tools in one. So it's not like they're going to sell it to you for, one flat fixed price. If you're not familiar, what you get is effectively a version of it's not Outreach, sorry. And apologies to people at Apollo that are like, we're not Outreach. I know you're not Outreach. I'm just, deficient up here. So what you get is a sequencer. It does calls, it does emails, it's got some task functionality so you can do some LinkedIn. It's got a decent enough integration without like having a full integration into Microsoft, which only Microsoft has, or at least so far is what I've seen. What I think is special about it, because obviously we weren't going to take all of this risk just for saving a couple of bucks. And don't get me wrong, it was a couple of bucks, and I definitely appreciated those couple of bucks in the bank account at the end of the year, especially after 2023. But what I really like about it, what's kind of special, is when you have both your data and your sequencer in the same spot, you can do some pretty interesting things, both on the reporting side of the data in terms of how we are, how you're reporting. And so say you look at a sequence, you say, okay, which contacts, which level, which types of companies with which ICPs responded better. You can get really strong data that way. But it's not just that, it's also in the plays that you can build. And I've got some comments on plays with Apollo coming a little bit later, but when you're able to build a list say you build a list in, any of the tool, they always have these like subscribe and get updates, which I hate. And I always turn off because I don't want to get an email every single time. In fairness, I'm not an SDR. I'm kind of an SDR manager or director or VP kind of in this context, but I don't want that notification. What I want is you to do something about it. And that's the great thing about Apollo Plays is you can set up these searches, they stay live, and you can have it automatically put anybody who matches that criteria into a specific sequence. And you can have it run all these rules and automations, and it's pretty neat there. What I don't love is Apollo's had some growing pains this year. And, fair enough to them. I'm not saying there were no deal breakers that we ran into. And anytime we did run in, eventually we did get a great solution. So, but it was just it's a newer tool, maybe not a newer tool, but it's a tool that's experienced, it's a company that's experienced some pretty extreme growth this year. And with extreme growth, your people, your systems, your processes are bound to break. And so we experienced a little bit of their growing pains, whether it was, support being a little bit slow or their, what else do we have? Support was a little bit slow a couple of times, but eventually we got it fixed. And then the plays, sometimes it just, maybe I'm just, deficient up here, but I just couldn't get some plays to work sometimes. That being said, most of that play stuff has been resolved. This is more of like if I was reviewing this in like the first half of 2023, I probably would have called that out more, but there were some growing pains. There's still some kinks working out, but they have a pretty great team that has been shipping new stuff pretty quickly. What I'm looking forward to kind of dovetails with what I don't love. I'm not a big fan in general of AI writing emails, especially one at a time. I'm a huge fan of doing things at scale. We'll talk a little bit about a tool that helps do that. But I just don't love the idea of, if I'm looking at this email, having a ChatGPT or some sort of OpenAI prompt, like, do that for me. If I'm there and I'm looking at a single email, I want to be the person that writes it. And that's kind of Apollo's approach right now. So what I'm looking forward to coming up later this year is how they incorporate AI deeper into the email writing stack, into the analytics stack. I think there's some really, really interesting things that they could do together by having both tools in one place. And so I think there's a huge opportunity. Even though I don't think their AI stuff is there quite yet, I do think I'm pretty excited about what's coming down the pipe. That's Apollo. We did obviously move off of Outreach and ZoomInfo and Salesforce. I don't have tons to say about any of them. We've used Outreach for a very long time. It is a really good tool. It doesn't have data. It also didn't have the ability to add multiple email addresses or more than 2 email addresses, which in 2024, especially with February coming around the clock, and the new Google, Yahoo email regulations, those are really going to impact large companies. They don't really impact me as much because, we're sending from a much smaller. We're definitely not hitting 5,000 emails a day. So it isn't really going to have much of an impact on me or my business. But I just think anybody who's using this tool, if eventually you want to get to a point where, you're spreading the load around, having 1 or 2 email addresses probably isn't going to work for you if you're sending any sort of email at scale. And then the one last advantage is if you're using Apollo, you don't have to deal with a bunch of other data vendors, and some of them can be very challenging to deal with. But that being said, so Apollo, I'm super happy. There have been some ups and downs, which were to be expected. Not all Apollo's fault, probably some unforced errors on our behalf. But overall, I really like having the tool all in one spot. As an agency, I like they've got sub-accounts so I can have all my customers have their own separate instances, which to try and do that and replicate that functionality in Salesforce is absolutely bonkers. So that's one of my favorite things. First favorite thing, biggest risk we took, and happy to say it's been paying off. Okay. I understand the irony of what I'm about to say next, given that I just said my first favorite thing was Apollo, and or at least one of my favorite things was Apollo, and that one of the best parts of Apollo is I don't have to deal with other data vendors. However, stay with me. Clay.com is the super spreadsheet all of us sales geeks were waiting for. It is one of my favorite places to find mobile numbers and scale ChatGPT prompts. And bear with me if you're not quite connecting on that second one. if all you're ever using it for is enrichment data, if all you're ever using it for is finding mobile numbers and validating emails, yes, that's amazing, but you are missing the best part about Clay. And let me talk to you about it. Clay is basically a spreadsheet that has all of the data vendors that you would want all in one. And you can stack a waterfall of enrichments one on top of each other, starting with the cheapest to the most expensive, and say, here's my list, go find any mobile number you can. And as soon as it finds one, it's going to pause all the enrichments for that single row, which means I can start in Apollo. I can get I've got mobile credits at Apollo. I start there. Any ones that don't have mobile credits, my team goes, throws them into a Clay template that we've created, and now goes and finds all of those mobile numbers. Now, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because one of my next favorite things is Orum. And if you're not using Orum with mobile data or direct lines, if your mobile direct numbers are not good, you are wasting your time, money, resources on a parallel dialer. It's not I highly recommend if you're spending all the money on Orum, spend a little bit of money on credits for Clay to make your Orum experience better. Now, Clay is effectively a super spreadsheet. You can do a bunch of crazy stuff. What I love about it is all the data vendors, I don't have to go and have a bunch of different API keys. I was trying to do a bunch of this in Google Sheets and then mixing in all these tools, and it brought it all together in a really clean interface. So what you get is a spreadsheet with all these different enrichment providers, and it's all in a credit system. But if you do have an API key, you can hook your API key into Clay, and then it's not going to charge you credits for those enrichments. So the special thing that I've mentioned is, well, the base level of what makes Clay awesome is finding mobile numbers from 5 different providers like that. It's super easy. But what's really special is something that I've been trying to do for a long time, which was scaling up a ChatGPT prompt. Because, I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but if you're a salesperson and you're using ChatGPT one at a time to write an email or to research a prospect, if you're using the UI for it, you're wasting your time. You're doing it wrong. It's a great tool. Don't get me wrong. I love it, but it's just way too much work when, let's put it this way. Every time I've tried to do something in ChatGPT, and I'd say almost every time, the bulk of them, I use this tool quite a bit. Almost every time I've tried to get GPT to do a task for me, I've been able to do it in the same amount of time and a better quality. Some examples would be times when I wanted to write a chapter for the book I'm working on, if I wanted to write a blog post, if I wanted to do anything new where there's like new thought involved. Now, that's not to say that there isn't value or use cases in ChatGPT. Our SDRs use it all the time I'll get to that in a minute. But let's pause. Scaling ChatGPT prompts. One of the magic parts of Clay is that you can stack 5 different enrichment sources. And I'm not talking about mobiles, I'm talking about companies. So you could take a company list and say, here's all the companies, here's their LinkedIn. Now you can enrich with their LinkedIn, so you can pull any data and use any data from their LinkedIn profile in your enrichment, in your ChatGPT prompt. Now say you also want to sell to companies using a certain technology or that have a certain keyword on their website or are hiring for a certain job title. Now you can stack all these enrichment sources into one sheet and then pass the results into a ChatGPT prompt. Then you can teach ChatGPT, it says, hey, this is what a good customer looks like. This is what a bad customer looks like. Look at these 5 variables for every single client and tell me if it's a good fit or not. And that alone is the single greatest magic part of Clay. We use this all the time to sort our lists and take a client with a huge target market. Say, last example, we had a customer that had 800,000 potential accounts, but they did a very specialized thing in the transportation space. And so what we were able to do is say, hey, let's get these 3 or 4 things that represent the type of thing that they're looking for, and let's feed them into a prompt, and let's turn that 800,000 account list into a list about 10, 13,000. And then it's such a huge time saver that it's been an absolute game changer for PR. It's something that we absolutely didn't have any budget for. And suddenly all our credits, we started off on like a couple $100 a month, and we were very quickly in the over $1,000 a month. And I had to have a chat with our finance team saying, listen, we can't live without this tool. It's going to be, we're going to have to make room. it to the point where like, I know if I look at my Slack and I've got, 6 Slack messages from like 3 or 4 different people, I'm like, I can almost guarantee we're out of Clay credits. I know there's always a big push at the end of the month to make sure that we use Clay credits, or sometimes we're running out of Clay credits, so we have to, get more or this or that. It's one of the things that I don't love is the way their credits work. I get that it's a business model, and if I was Clay, I would probably do the exact same thing, but I don't love how the credits don't roll over. So that's one thing to keep an eye on. Again, I suspect it has to do with how they've negotiated with all their data vendors, and I don't envy the guy's job who, Varun, I know you had to go and negotiate with all these different data vendors out there. So like, I totally appreciate that this is probably a limitation that there wasn't a good solution for, but it's just one thing to look out for. Another thing, if you're looking at Clay, it's a great tool and it's very complex. It probably took me 3-6 months to get up and running and like really proficient at it. So if you're looking at, embarking on this, hit up their Slack community. They've got a ton of great resources in the library, templates that make it really easy. Their Slack community and the people that work at Clay are probably the best, the most responsive folks of any company's supports team I've ever encountered. So it's one of the things, it is one of the downsides of the complexity, but it is the complexity that enables you to do all these really great things. So take that for, these things kind of balance each other out. I don't want to just sell you on this tool and say, hey, it's the greatest thing. It's super easy. It's 4 clicks. You get all this great stuff. There is some of that, and they do have some really great templates, and the really complex stuff, the harder to learn stuff, is really like where the money's at, in my opinion. The third one, ChatGPT. Do I need to explain to you what it is? I'm pretty sure you know and are using ChatGPT. You might even be using it to summarize this and save yourself a bunch of time from having to read this. What do I love? It changed the game in sales. My buddy Kenny he's been saying how AI is going to totally change things for probably the last 7 years, and it's finally come true. So you were only off by 2 years. Good job, Kenny. Like, this is pretty awesome. What I love, what everybody loves, it's a great tool. What I don't love, doing things one at a time, kind of like I mentioned with Clay, it can be a productivity trap. One hack that I learned is basically using a super prompt. If anybody's keen, drop me an email, or we can shoot a link to the blog post from the interview that we had where we learned how to build super prompts. But if you're using ChatGPT, using a super prompt as sort of a, it's almost like a template where you say, hey, here's this prompt. This is what I want to do, make this prompt better. And what it's going to ask ChatGPT is like, hey, this is what we're trying to do. Ask any questions and help me get a prompt that's going to give me consistent, repeatable results. And so that's my recommendation to you. What I'm looking forward to, larger context windows, exploring the ChatGPT or the GPT marketplace, building little bots. We've got some recursive thing that we're testing out. So yeah, I'm excited about ChatGPT. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I'm sure everybody ChatGPT was probably everybody in sales' favorite thing this year. Okay, last but not least, Orum. If you're not familiar, Orum is a parallel dialer, and I say parallel, not power. So if you're familiar with power dialers, they would dial like one line at a time, and you would just dial in, or you would connect on your computer, and you just stay on the line, and then once the call finished, it would dial the next one. Orum is similar to ConnectedCell. If you've ever used ConnectedCell, ConnectedCell had a huge call center, and you would get 20 people dialing for you, and then as soon as somebody picked up, somebody would hit spacebar, and the customer would get connected. Orum basically does that, but with software. And so there's similar upsides and downsides, but what you really get is instead of dialing one line at a time, you're dialing 5 lines at a time. So this is a parallel dialer. Now, my favorite thing, and the reason Orum made the list, and they just barely squeaked it in, but I got to give them props because they said, we are going to ship this feature in November, and lo and behold, they shipped this feature in November. They shipped the Apollo integration, so I can use Orum with my Apollo, and there's no issues. So big fan of 3 to 5xing the call productivity of my SDRs. That was a pretty big win for us. So what I don't love about Orum, sometimes it takes 5 seconds to connect, and I know this comes down to how many lines you're dialing all at one time. and there are things you can do to fix it. But that is one potential downside that you need to be aware of, and so that you can, sometimes there's a trade-off of, it's okay to dial 6 lines at a time because it's an absolutely massive list. If it's a much smaller list, you absolutely don't want to be dialing 5 lines at a time because that 5 seconds is going to burn through that list quicker. It's not always 5 seconds. It has to do with the settings. I know they are working on this. They've already made improvements to it. So it's just something to be aware of. What I'm looking forward to, more integrations, better analytics, more capabilities down the line. One highlight of Orum, we're a remote sales development team. And so having that, we're all in the same room experience is something that, I don't know, is just missing in the world of Zoom. And the Orum live sales room tool, I can't remember what the name of it is pretty cool. Listening to 15 SDRs all dialing at the same time is just some sort of beautiful chaos that is hard to appreciate, even if you're currently thinking I'm insane for thinking that's an awesome thing. So, it gives you that we're all live and working together kind of feeling. And that's sometimes missing in a remote sales context. So, yeah, those are my 4 things. Orum, ChatGPT, Clay, and Apollo. It's 2023 is a big year for sales tools. We effectively doubled the productivity of our SDRs, and those 4 tools were a huge part of that story. So thanks for listening. If you made it this far, let me know what you thought of the new format. If you're on YouTube, leave me a comment, say hello. Let me know what you think of the 2 cameras thing. And happy prospecting this year, and I hope you have a great 2024.